You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss dungeon design. Well, hello there, sages and adventurers. My name's Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. How are you this fine day?
Great. I was going to do a thing where I was like going to roll some dice like I was rolling on a random table, and I literally, as you were doing the intro, realized I have no dice. So
you could have just got up and walked away like I did last. That's a great way to start an episode. Just be meandering through the room.
I guess he's not participating. No, okay. So I was rolling on a random table. Look what it's
what was the reaction table? How are you feeling today?
Oh, that's good.
There it is. It's like a Shadowdark time.
Hostile.
Oh God. Well then I want out of here. So take us to the table.
Yeah, can do. All right. Just a heads up here before I dive into this context for our dungeon design episode. The narrative setup I'm about to read has some pretty significant spoilers for Dolmenwood in it. So if you are planning on being a player in that setting, I would skip ahead. We'll put a timestamp in the show notes. But here we go. Long before the coming of mortal folk to Dolmenwood, Horblight Keep stood as the icy heart of the Cold Prince's domain. A dread fairy sovereign whose wintry magic once blanketed the land. Perched atop chalky cliffs overlooking the cold waters of Lake Longmere, the keep was the terminus of the Prince's Road, a fairy path that linked the wood to Phrygia, the glacial realm of the Winter Court. From within its frost-clad towers and arcane gardens, the Cold Prince ruled for centuries, hosting revels of eerie delight and cruel enchantment. Hedge mazes, grottos, and plazas within the keep's walls teemed with strange presences and capricious spirits. Fairy artifacts and fey-laced enchantments persist in these grounds despite the banishment of their master. When the mortal world rose against Fairy and the Ring of Chell was forged to bar the gates to Phrygia, the Cold Prince's reign shattered. Horblight fell into ruin, abandoned to ivy, frost, and the bitter wind. Yet the keep endures, pristine, as fresh snow unnaturally preserved by lingering fairy magic. Its vaults are said to hold the Cold Prince's untouched treasures, guarded by wards, bands, and spectral sentinels. Now, rumor whispers of the Cold Prince's scheme to destroy the ring and reopen the gates to Phrygia. If such a plot succeeded, Horblight would rise again, its silent halls echoing with fairy footfall, its gates flung wide open to armies of frost and shadow. Now, that is very cool. And it is kind of the intro to my little dungeon I've been working on, Jody. However, as you might expect, since based on what I just said, there's no officially published dungeon for Horblight Keep, despite its significance and prominence in the setting of Dolmenwood. However, I need one. Our campaign is set to end in this dungeon. This will be the final delve of a multi-year campaign. How the heck does one design a dungeon that captures so much within its halls?
Whoa, well, thank you for that chilly tale.
I didn't spoil anything for you, did I?
Smidge. Tiny smidge. It confirmed assumptions. But as the Cold Prince would extend his reign and make us all subject to his icy domain, let's gather round the fire, shall we?
The blue flames of frost.
Flames. Let's gather around the fire and have a little chat about this dungeon design. So there is no dungeon for Horblight Keep. So you got to build one, you say.
I do, and this is actually on Gavin Norman, the co-creator and writer of Dolmenwood's radar. He has said that it is somewhere in the kind of arc of products, and that it will likely be something akin to a mega dungeon. And everyone's very excited about that, myself included, but I need it in like 2 weeks. So that's that. Yeah, that's that. We got to do it, to go it alone and do it ourselves.
Well, not to be unkind or ungenerous or unappreciative as a player at your table, but of the two of us, dungeons are kind of my jam, dude. So, obviously I can't help you much as I'm going to be the player in this dungeon. Very excited to get back into a dungeon, especially with playing a thief right now. It's funny how often thieves feel like a duck out of water when not in dungeons. But so what's been your process for starting to chip away at this thing? Or rather, why not do what I do and just grab dungeons do exist. People have written, I believe they're called modules, and they have dungeons in them. You could get one.
All right. So let me start off with my. So there's a couple of reasons. My issue with modules is twofold. You do not. You have a love of modules that I just either don't share, or that because I'm running a setting that is hyper specific in terms of tone and theme and vibes and whatever, there just aren't very many modules that like fit in well without a lot of conversion. And I want to say, Jody, and I think you would agree with me, that I do not find conversion of dungeon mechanics, meaning monsters or traps or anything like that. That stuff is very easy. You do it on the fly, you do it beforehand, whatever. For me, the actual challenge of conversion is just the lore of dungeons and actually swapping out monsters and having to. I like having in front of me a bespoke tool for the dungeon I am running, and I don't want to have to kind of piecemeal a bunch of mechanical pieces together in terms that are linked to lore elements. So I can, if I can change stuff on the fly, great, that's easy. If I have to switch out all of the monsters to make them relevant and fit in Dolmenwood, for instance, that is not a value proposition that I'm interested in. So I don't know, like that's why I'm designing this from whole cloth, right? Like that's because first of all, it's an interesting thing to do and it's fun and I enjoy it, but also there just isn't anything out there that I could find that was going to give me enough value for the time I was inevitably going to have to invest in converting all of the lore and narrative and that kind of like set dressing stuff.
Right. And while I do enjoy that part of modules and picking up modules and reading through them and thinking about, oh, I could remove this faction and put in this faction, or I could change these features of the map, infamously spinning maps around just to geographically make them fit in my setting. There's also the issue of just volume. There is so much stuff out there to chew through to try and even begin to grapple with what's available. You know, that's why I've limited my search to kind of old school modules. And I mean, it seems like every day on the Facebook page, there's, hey, I made a module for Shadow Dark and check it out. And, you know, I've certainly run a handful of the new ones to varying forms of success. If you've listened to any of our back episodes, you know, did you try that path? Like I'm not trying to sell you on like, hey, I don't like Brussels sprouts. And people are always like, eat them like this. I'm like, no, I don't like them. So, you know, I'm not trying to convince you, hey, you should go find the right module.
Yeah.
You know, I'm frankly more excited to go. So how did you approach this process? But you always do research. So did you do some research?
I did. I have, and maybe I didn't look in the right corners of the internet, which, you know, they are hard to find. I am not a thief in this regard, but I do have reasonably good research skills, especially when it comes to the Discord search function, which is both awful and also awful. But I did do some searches and some looking at the Necrotic Gnome Dolmenwood server, and I think a lot of people have found kludges. They found dungeons that might work. The problem is that none of them capture what I think is sort of the essential elements of Horblight Keep in particular. And I actually don't know that I see it as a quote-unquote mega dungeon. I am interested to see what Gavin Norman does with it, and that will be the canonical dungeon once it's published, of course. But the other thing that I did was that I looked at some review blogs, and I think there are two sort of indispensable blogs for old school adventure reviews. The one that everyone seems to kind of know about and with for good reason is Bryce Lynch's 10-foot pole, which is bar none, I think, the best dungeon module, settings sometimes review blog on the internet. But I want to flag a Shadowdark specific review blog that if folks aren't paying attention to, they hie thee hence to 2d6 Stingbats, the Shadowdark specific review blog. What I appreciate about both of these boffins of our hobby is that they have both published review standards. And so I'll link to their blogs and to their review standards in the show notes. The reason that I want to cite their review standards is because if folks are looking for not just like information on how to write a module and how to write a published product, but sort of a very succinctly put methodology for how to design good dungeons, period, full stop, you could do a lot worse than these because they are tersely written and they are, like many good dungeons, they are both tersely written and informative. So I think it's a great place to start. They also, they call out lots of things that you can then kind of dive into in terms of interactivity or, factions and stuff like that. There's lots of elements that they kind of call out by name, but don't necessarily maybe go into detail about that you can kind of sift through. And I think they do a good job of highlighting the kinds of things that are important in dungeons. And so I didn't find anything on either of those that fit the bill. And also, I just started to get this kind of bee in the old bonnet, Jody, that I wanted to try and design a dungeon specifically as if I were going to publish it. But like so many of the things that I do, I knew I was going to be stealing a lot of stuff from Dolmenwood or from creators. And so I'm not planning on publishing it, but I am writing and designing this dungeon as if I were. So I'm going to try and do layout on it and all of that and try and learn. I don't have that much longer to really get the process kind of done, which, that's all good. But that's where I'm coming from is I went through this arc of let's find a module. I don't think I can find any modules. I'm going to have to write my own dungeon. Why don't I write my own dungeon module and just make the stakes really low and just make it for me and see if it's good. And if it's good, maybe I'll, and the playtest goes well. Playtest, meaning our time at the table with the dungeon. Then maybe I'll put it together into something that I can throw up on the internet.
Okay. So we both have adopted or believe in the old hanker and furnail, but there are many other sources that could claim this one, the power word, or the defining theme. So Dolmenwood's your defining theme, it sounds like, for this dungeon, plus a heavy sprinkle therein of Cold Prince and aforementioned narrative beats that you included when you were setting the scene for us.
Yeah.
You're, again, for past listeners and for me, I know Mega Dungeon, probably not the direction you want to go, both in terms of just time and narrative satisfaction. There's an amount of how long do you want to be in the dungeon. So I've gathered up, okay, is Jody is going along for this ride of thought with Matt, is you've got your couple power terms, the Frost Prince, what that entails, Dolmenwood, what that means. You've got your size and scope of dungeon. It does need to be probably at least a few sessions worth of play. Great.
Sure.
Cool. Now what? What was your next step in the process?
Find a map.
Uh-huh.
So I love, as many people do, Dyson Logos is where I go kind of first. And I actually knew about how large I wanted this thing to be and kind of the general vibe I wanted. So I was looking for something akin to a keep, right? I mean, this is, it's in the name, Horriblite Keep. But when you find keeps on online in terms of maps, they oftentimes they don't really have what I was looking for, which are little nooks and crannies. And I found a specific map on Dyson Logos, which I will post in the show notes, but you can't look at it, Jody.
Got it.
But the other thing I was looking for is how many rooms it had. And I was looking for something between like 30 and 40 rooms. I know this is a spoiler for you, but granted, like, you know. Hey.
In the moment, that will fall squarely out my ears and brain, and I will be busy doing silly voices.
But I wanted something in the 30 to 40 room area ballpark, because those dungeons tend to feel like they are full and complete. And I also perhaps obviously wanted a dungeon with multiple levels. And so I wanted a ground floor, an upper floor, and a dungeon floor. And maybe the dungeon has multiple levels. Maybe the upper floors have multiple levels in the the minarets or whatever, or the towers of the keep. Somebody's going to correct me on my nomenclature. But I think one thing that is true of Dyson Logos' maps broadly, and a lot of other people who seem to be designing dungeons for old school play is that when you start looking at them, you start realizing that they've internalized the looping paths, the multiple entry points. And I definitely felt that. And what I like about not drawing my own map, which is something I actually have realized I like doing, but I don't get a whole lot of satisfaction out of it, because I don't have a lot of practice. And so sometimes for me, I don't know how you feel about this as a module guy. For me, I have this problem of I'm not great at drawing dungeons, and I could get better, but in order to get better, I need to draw more dungeons, and I have limited time. And so I find myself just gravitating towards people who are just better at it than I am, because then I can skip to the part where I'm actually doing the creative stuff that I think I'm reasonably good at, and the stuff that is going to be more, if not actionable and useful, than the stuff that is just more creative. So that's what I did. I found a Dyson Logos map. It works for me. It's about 30 some odd rooms, and it has the vibe and kind of the interesting elements that I think will be fun for you all as players to explore, and will give me the opportunities to kind of diversify the content and do what needs to be done to make this dungeon kind of come to life.
Awesome. There is a difference there in our approach to, I think, GMing in general. Funny enough, as you were going through that, I was thinking, no, I grab modules definitely because there's already maps in them, usually multiple maps if we're talking about old school modules. And there's a story, and the dungeon's populated already for me. So the juice for me is literally the inspiration of what is the story of this dungeon as I read through the module, and then going, how do I make that, or does that fit my campaign setting? And how do I wrangle and compress or stretch this thing to fit my players and what they're poking around at the world, and back and forth and round and round. However, that's enjoyable for me because I enjoy world building. I like the process of watching my players stretch and pull at not the map per se, but the campaign world. I've actually started, this is a little tangential, but I've started awarding XP to my players when they canonize something. So not just you made something up randomly on the fly, but grounded within our play experience, we go, hey, no, that is how elves, we are all expecting elves to behave in this way because of a decision you made. XP, everybody, boom, XP just happened because the world has now been codified through your guys' play, and that's awesome. That's the juice for me. So
I love that, Jenny. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's a weird kind of roundabout, but a couple episodes ago, I talked about dwarves and that like they got to this underground unused burial site, and how poignant and meaningful that was. And that wasn't a thing that really fully had set in my mind about, oh man, like dwarves don't live underground anymore. In my campaign setting, dwarves don't live underground anymore. But that was a great example of what I'm talking about.
We believe.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there is a difference there for me of I enjoy those things. Populating a dungeon for me is
Yeah.
tedious. That is not a thing I particularly enjoy.
Sure.
In part because I've read so many modules, I'm like, hey, I know what I need to get in here. I need a certain number of low-level challenges, mid-level challenges, high-level challenges. I need, there ought to be some traps and some this and that. You specifically said a few moments ago that you wanted to make sure there was things that you thought, and knowing us after 3 years, have a pretty good bead on what are we going to enjoy, what are we going to think's fun, whether you are tailor making that per specific thing for each of the 6 players or just broad brush stroking it. I think both are valid approaches. The thing that I know showed up on the Discord that you and I kind of in warming up for the episode and just hanging out a little bit, you mentioned the word things to interact with.
Ah, yes. Okay, so...
Oof, what a loaded term that I'd never considered. I had never considered that the term interact with a dungeon is fraught and explosive and dangerous to discuss.
No.
I was like, oh my God, what?
All right.
But yeah, why am I being dramatic about this? Unpack it for folks.
All right, so I am going to rattle off so many books and resources in this answer, but from the top, what I want to do is say that I want to recommend the 2D6 Stingbats blog. My goodness, that is a tongue twister. And I want to specifically call out that on the Discord, there's a thread for this, and it is an outstanding group of people, and there's just a lot of discussion about dungeon design and about module design. And so I asked a question about this, Jody, like, what does interactivity mean to you folks? And somebody on the Discord, who I will give credit to, I can't remember off the top of my head, posted this blog, All Dead Generations, specifically about defining interactivity. And it is, I think, a pretty seminal work now. Like it was published actually pretty recently, but it kind of made the rounds in the OSR. I think it was published in like June of this year. And it like very quickly and rapidly was sort of shared, and now I think is considered kind of a definitional kind of a way to define interactivity. But again, this is going to be kind of a laundry list of resources here. I think we can get back to interactivity, but I would be remiss if I also didn't call out as a source for kind of a dungeon checklist and figuring out those interactable elements, but also a lot of other things. The His Majesty the Worm dungeon design course is one of the best resources on creating and designing dungeons I have ever seen. And it brings together a lot of great stuff from blogs and from other places and people on the internet, and certainly, a lot of the wisdom that has come from so many years of dungeon design. And so those two things are kind of where I want to start. The only other thing I want to mention is that if I have the opportunity to mention Goblin Punch, I will. It is my favorite blog. Arnold over at Goblin Punch is an amazing, just like very creative person. He has a great dungeon checklist for like things to include. So to answer your question about interactivity, I'm kind of taking a very circuitous route because in my opinion, interactivity and designing dungeons that are interactive is a rather abstruse thing. So the All Dead Generations blog has this to say about interactivity, that it's a tricky balancing act, I'm quoting here, providing passive interactive elements and general logic that lead to, highlight, and sometimes offer potential solutions to obstacles of the dungeon, but also keeping things from being too complex or worse, confusing and contradictory in any individual room. Once players start thinking about the meaning of a dungeon, its history, and how to use it, they often get a little bit obsessed. They read into unexpected things, and this means that a good designer has to keep them from wandering down too many mental dead ends. On the scale of a whole adventure, this means avoiding incoherent location design, things like guard barracks, whose only access to the throne room they guard is through the, quote, Hall of Traps. At an individual key level, it's more complex, but largely accomplished by making sure one's useless information and purely descriptive dressing aren't too tempting, either to the referee or to the players. Now, this isn't a definition of interactivity. I think the entire blog kind of defines it, but this is the paragraph that stood out to me, because I think oftentimes when we see books like The Dread Thingonomicon or the Tome of Adventure Design, or even the tables in the Shadowdark core rulebook, those role tables often generate dungeon dressing. And one thing that I wanted to do in this dungeon was create interactivity, not just passive vibes, right? Not just like dungeon dressing, right? Just window dressing, I guess is the word I was looking for. So the way that I internalize interactivity is thusly. I internalize interactivity as rooms that have relationships to other rooms, factions that have relationships to other factions, and physical elements of the dungeon that have relationships to other physical and elements of the dungeon. So you pull a lever in one room, you hear a ka-chunk, it changes something in the dungeon, but it doesn't just like change something or in a way that isn't important. It changes something in a way that can be used by the players. It raises or lowers a portcullis, but that portcullis is like down the hall, right? And maybe it makes sense, and maybe it's pushing the bounds of reality a little bit, but that's one very basic way. But the way that I accomplish interactivity in my dungeons and in my games is almost always through NPCs and factions. And so to me, any good dungeon has factional elements, and those factional elements can be very different. I'm not going to get into what they are in this dungeon because those are actually kind of pivotal and spoilers. But the thing that I think, kind of broadly speaking, about interactivity that's important is that just describing a space isn't enough. Having a very long Gygaxian description of a barracks doesn't mean anything if the players can't use that information and leverage that information to do things in the dungeon. And so that's very hard, and it's something that I think takes a lot of time, obviously, to get better at. And I don't think I'm particularly good at it. But another example, and this is the last thing I'll give you, is maybe there is a faction in the dungeon that wants an item. Put that item with another faction, and put that faction in a part of the dungeon that is barricaded, right? And then suddenly you have interactivity. You meet this one faction, they want an item, they will help you if you get it. You meet this other faction, you realize they have the item. How do you find out who has the item? That should also be an interactive element. Maybe you find a note, maybe you find it written on the wall, whatever. But there should be ways that the dungeon has strings that are connected, not just physically, not just looping paths and multiple entry, but really we want our dungeons to look like that meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with all the red string, right?
Right.
And you can make that, you can overdo it, but to me that's what interactivity is it's not just set dressing, it's actionable stuff that players can clearly see is leverageable. So I don't know if that's too abstract of a definition, but I can give you a couple of examples if you want them. But I'll turn it over to you to kind of get us back on track if that wasn't really what you were looking for. But that's kind of my long.
Most definitely thing. It is the whole thrust of this episode is the notion of dungeon design. What goes into a dungeon and ostensibly a Shadowdark dungeon, or a dungeon for use alongside Shadowdark or in your setting. And I think they're in the explanation you just gave. Man, I am instantly worried, because I always worry about this in my own GMing practice, that what you're describing flirts dangerously with railroading in the not positive sense. I joke often that I railroad my players, that I'm like, nope, you're getting on the train and we are going. there is a...
Yeah, explain this, because I find it almost impossible to understand how. So
okay,
yeah,
how I do it?
No.
You've been railroaded so many times.
Okay. So jokes aside, I don't think that just to be clear, I don't think that you do. But I want to hear how you think that this translates to railroading.
Okay, if you have the red string image in mind of there are multiple factions, multiple interactions, and multiple thises and multiple that's, my experience and lack of skill way up on the pedestal here of maybe I'm doing something wrong is
caveat, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yes, please. Is that the players will inevitably latch on to a faction that makes completing the dungeon incredibly difficult, or they will creatively find a speed run to bypass all of those things, thereby unintentionally, through clever play, putting themselves in a situation where they are massively disadvantaged in the end because they did not connect enough of the red strings. So the railroad comes in, you have all these interactive elements, which I think is a good thing. I want to be clear. Like, this is not me taking a dump on your thesis. This is me going...
No, you can if you want. I think this is an interesting path to walk down.
Is if the players again, with well-intentioned and clever play, manage to bypass too many of the threads, that they end up disadvantaging themselves by doing the thing they were told they were supposed to be doing.
Right.
Therein, as a GM, to not screw them over for doing the thing you asked them to do, you have to plan out, or quantum ogre, for lack of a better term, which red strings land in front of them.
Right.
Or the other option is the players grab every thread and they make a giant ball of yarn of your dungeon, and you now have to take narrative control in a way that says, and we are moving to the end, even though it's not in alignment with any of the... In the red pin analogy, just to keep it going, there are red threads and there are pins. And if they make a big ball out of the thread, we have lost all the pins in the wall that are the anchor points. And so you as the GM have to go, I am forcing pins back into the equation. So it seems, I love this idea in practice of running many a module over the years. And I think this is the very exciting and noble attempt you are making, is to balance those two elements of lots of interactivity, lots of autonomy.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason we don't see modules made that way very much, because of all of the issues I ran into. Famously, Castle Amber is a classic old module where you bop around in a castle meeting this weird ghosty ? Family. And it almost demands a level of, once the players latch onto something, you have to shift things in terms of factions or otherwise, to get them going. Like, okay, if you just leave everything even stakes, this sounds so negative. You run into what Critical Role Campaign 3 was, where the players never commit to a faction or a course of action, and they just faff about in the space inevitably. For those of you who are Critical Role fans, especially of season 3, please forgive me for my very critical take.
I think that's a widely held critique of campaign 3.
So I love the idea. I just think you are, and this is kind of bless you and why I love you, is you're going like, hey, I'm going to try this thing and I want to do it on maximum hard mode for the my first swing, which is also 100%. Very Matt, and you're annoyingly usually pretty good at it. So
here is my rebuttal.
Yes, please.
So I think some good places to start would be the old school Essentials adventures. So you've actually run a heavily modified version of the Incandescent Grottos, for instance. I have run the Hole in the Oak is what it's called. So both of those adventures, I think, are good examples of high interactivity factional elements. They are not perfect. There's plenty of critiques. I think another good example would be some of Kelsey's work in terms of the setting books, the Gloaming, the newest Curse Scroll 4. These have lots of highly interactive elements. The way that I think maybe that red string meme is actually not a great idea, because to me, the string is placed there by the players, not by the GM. And this is a very key element of the players find these nodes, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually want to dovetail this in to the way that I'm thinking about doling out information and describing rooms, which is from a blog called DIY and Dragons, which is the landmark hidden secret methodology. And so the way that I'm thinking about, and actually, before we get into that, and maybe I'll cut this, or maybe I won't. Maybe we'll just kind of really just go freeform here. I want to actually go down the dungeon checklist that I used, because I think that this, coupled with my description of interactivity, might give you a sense of kind of what I'm doing here, and maybe change your mind, maybe not. But so this comes from, again, His Majesty the Worm, a link in the show notes. So here are the elements of the dungeon checklist that I used. There's lots of these. This is the one that I chose to use. The first one is a reason to explore. Pretty simple. Those are things like hooks or other kind of elements to get the players in. Number 2, a reason to talk. NPCs, things to talk to and engage with. Number 3, a reason to fight. And number 4, closely linked, a reason to flee. Number 5, a reason to breathe easy. Number 6, a reason to experiment. Number 7, a reason to be surprised. And number 8, a reason to return. Here is why I think this is a useful methodology, is because what you said was, you use the phrase complete the dungeon. And for me, I am not interested in players completing dungeons. Like, you guys went into Castle Zintalan, which is a fairly, not just a fairly large, it is an enormous mega dungeon. Mm-hmm. And you decided not to go back. That's fine. Did you have a reason to return? Yeah, you knew there was like super valuable items in there. It was stupidly dangerous. And you lost at least one character in there. And you guys just decided not to go back. There's lots of stuff in there. Talk about a module I had to change a bunch of lore for. But I used Castle Zintalan in Dolmenwood, and I thought I had some similar kind of vibes, and it definitely an NPC in that module has become a central NPC in kind of the greater Dolmenwood lore. So too has the central family in that module, has kind of been blended into the lore. And you guys only went there for, I don't know, in terms of time at the table, maybe 8 hours, probably less, and that's fine. And that, I don't feel the need for you guys to complete the dungeon. And so for me, this dungeon at the end of our campaign, am I playing a pretty high stakes game here because I don't care if you complete it? Yeah. But you guys have, and there will be signposting to kind of allure you of this. You guys have a mission. You've been given a mission by a faction in the world, and that will narrow your focus. You have a very specific reason to go there and explore and figure out the kind of capital T truth about what's going on in terms of the Cold Prince and whatnot. And so I would like to think that's not railroading, because many player decisions led to that quest. These are all different elements, and now I want to circle back to the landmark hidden secret, which is this idea that you can, when you're describing a particular room, there's 3 levels of information. There's landmarks that you get freely, hidden information you got to spend some time to look for, and secret information that you have to give up. There's a lot of risk, either time or what have you. Those are things that the players either likely won't find or are going to take a lot of investment to find. And I think that with using landmarks as signposts and hidden stuff as kind of a carrot on the end of a stick alongside secret stuff, and those dungeon checklists, you can get pretty close to a highly interactive dungeon that gives the players the opportunity to decide how they explore it and how much of it they explore.
Yeah, and I mean that's the goal. And I think my phrasing of complete the dungeon is really around that notion of how much do they explore, and what are the players going to need to complete in order to feel satisfied with the space. So in the case of Castle Zintalin, I think we played 2 sessions in that location, maybe 3. I was only there for the very, very, very first one. And then those were unfortunately some of the sessions I missed. And the players got to a point where they said, hey, we've seen enough of this place. We're moving on to other things.
Yeah.
Okay. They, as weird as it sounds, completed the dungeon.
Okay.
For the players, they went, I've interacted sufficiently to see what I need to see. Let's move on. Rad. Totally here for that. Admittedly, in this particular dungeon, we have been on this trajectory for a long time. So the completion of Horblight Keep and the completion of the mission tied therein is a certain level of like, hey, we have to finish this thread. This is where this thread, this big campaign pin is in this building.
Right.
We got to go there and pluck that pin.
Right.
How many rooms we poke at, how many halls we walk down, how many secret doors we find, that's always, I think, needs to be.
Oh, there aren't any secret doors.
Okay, good to know. I'm really glad I'm playing a thief. Sad trombone.
I took them all out.
Thanks, man. God bless it. I found one many months ago. It was wonderful. I'm all done now. So just for phrasing of my completion, I really like His Majesty the Worm list. I think conceptually that's really solid. Man, I want to go back though because if we're going to move to, let's get to something actionable. Let's talk about all right, so what, if you're a GM, what the heck can you do with any of this stuff? That piece you gave from DIY and Dragons, the landmark hidden secret method, I want to highlight. A while back, we talked about a wizard, the module, a wizard. And I had some mixed feelings about it. We talked about it in terms of like using it and framing horror in Shadow Dark and other, D20 fantasy style games. A thing that module does really, really well is the layout of, and it calls it something different than Landmark Hidden Secret. I believe what it does is what is seen, what is hidden, and what can be discovered is kind of the phrasing it uses. Right. But it's immediately the same of you walk into the room, and I noticed on the All Dead Generations blog, it's the same thing of you walk into the room, it's a library. You don't need to say there's this many bookcases and the bookcases are on this wall and there's a desk and there's a pile of books on the desk and then there's a rug. And no, it's a library. Imagine a fantasy library. If there are a couple specific items that are going to be unusual about that library room, describe those. Otherwise, it's a library. Move on. And I really appreciated that in a wizard, in alignment with that DIY and Dragons mindset of landmark hidden secret method, it was so easy to run it. It was so accessible in terms of clearing that mental overhead for seeing when a player is touching a pin, to stick with our red thread analogy.
Man, I'm going to rue the day that
really overdo this one. But it's to see those key location points. Mm-hmm. And when you're reading through it, I mean, you have the luxury of you're writing your own dungeon here.
Sure.
So you're going to remember everything, but you're also doing it with the mindset of what does it look like to format a dungeon? And that's one of the hardest things. It's one of the biggest problems for anybody who's ever read any of Gygax's modules.
Yep.
Whoa, are they difficult to use? You need to commit they're only, 20, 30 pages. Yeah. And you have to memorize all 20, 30 pages. I'm exaggerating. Because of the way they're written, it's so much easier to go, okay, it's a library. It looks like a library. What's hidden? Well, in the desk in the library is
right.
And behind one of the bookcases is and if any player says I go and poke at those things, then you just tell them those things are there. And then the secret, as you phrased it, which I like, or what can be discovered. The phrase I like a lot that I think is an important part of a dungeon, and literally the dungeon I've been running for the last few sessions, is that secret method has gates around it. Like what are the secret items in the dungeon? Mm-hmm. Those things you mentioned a cost of maybe time or danger or something like that. Yeah. In one way or another, the way I would internalize that is this notion of gating things.
Sure.
That yes, it could be literally a mechanical portcullis gate with a latch in another room. It could be a hidden key that if you don't find that key, you don't open that. And obviously these things hope this is the obvious thing out loud. Those things need not be essential to, again, air quotes, complete the dungeon.
Yes, yes,
nothing
this is very important.
Of the 1, 2, 3, what's obvious, what's hidden, what's discoverable. If you have to go discover it, that can't be required to go interact with, in the case of a wizard, the wizard at the end of the tower, because that's the only way out of that dungeon. Well, then you can't make it a secret to how you get there, because the players may never find it. Or you as the GM have to go, actually, this magic door just pops open. And that's, everybody kind of goes, okay, yeah, we didn't look at the third stone from the left in the fourth room.
Right.
Porta potty. Bummer.
So that's huge, man. That's huge.
It's just, and I think in terms of that, again, sticking with this idea of completing the dungeon, because you are building a dungeon that has a narrative stake of completion to it. I mean,
yes, I am personally. Yeah.
And you've even told our party that, like, hey, we are heading towards the end of this campaign.
Yes.
And all arrows and roads have led us through character choice to this location. I want to give you your due.
Thank you.
You don't run like I do, where you're like, you will go to Horblike. It is, that we have meandered our way over a course of years to this big scary place. So, but we do have to finish the thing. We have to,
yes,
get there or die trying. And I think, in a way I've never really considered before now, that notion of, is the dungeon somewhere just to poke around, or is there something you got to get done there?
Okay. So this is huge.
Yeah. Is maybe the thing that is hidden. There's so much. I'm going to bounce this back to you in just a second.
No,
There
you're
is
good.
so much that I have learned about Shadow Dark that is beautifully not said, that I am now, I look at almost all of role playing this way: is, okay, this is what it says to do. Got it. This is what I'm going to bring to the table with my group. Got it. What's the gap in between?
Yeah.
And Shadow Dark, because it's so rules light, and so make it your own, those assumptions you bring, you will very quickly bridge those gaps. And the interesting thing I think I'm seeing is, in this discussion of dungeon design, what kind of dungeon is it? And if your play group is, we go in to win and defeat the dungeon, that's going to literally change the design of the dungeon, as opposed to, it's a cool place to go check out. And I can speak to Castle Zintalin. The party went, that was an interesting place to go check out. We checked it out. This sucks. We out.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts. First, I am designing this dungeon to be as if it were not the end of a campaign, but obviously. So this is what I'll tell you. One of the factions that I put into the dungeon is you guys. So there is a faction that was hired by Ygraine Mordelin, your benefactor. I was like, how do I make this authentic to dungeon design and potentially module writing? But how do I also make it so that it makes sense for my players? And I was like, oh, my players are just a faction. And so, granted, in the writing of it, I've written it more generically, but a part of the kind of thrust of the module is literally the narrative of our campaign. And so you guys are there with a very specific purpose that interestingly aligns and diverges from other factions in the dungeon. And so I have tried to kind of, as a kind of an end around and backdoor, you and your fellow players into the module. It's you guys are baked into the factional elements. So that's number one. Number two, I love this idea of landmark hidden secret. And I want everybody to read it, because everyone's going to kind of interpret it and use it their own way. For me, landmark information is stuff that the players either have to know, or it's just kind of obvious stuff that you would see walking into a room. Hidden information is stuff that takes like a minor sacrifice around to find, right? Like your description of what's in the desk, it's going to take you around to open up the desk. Maybe it's trapped, but the trap isn't like super gnarly. A secret is like you need to spend, that's an investment. Either the trap is really nasty and very hard to find, or the secret door is extremely well hidden in a part of the dungeon that's going to take you a long time to get, that kind of stuff. And those secrets, to me, are stuff that like you're fine with the players not finding. And I want to read from DIY and Dragons here. This is a couple of paragraphs that I think are just like really good at kind of summarizing what we're talking about. And I quote, "If the players have to know some information, it should be landmark. This is true of all visual description needed to create a shared image of the game world in everyone's imagination. If information is really important, it should probably be landmark or hidden. No player wants their judge to fudge and lie about the result of a die roll, or to railroad and seize control of the characters to make them do something. But no one wants to cancel their expedition and spend the rest of the session hastily putting together a backup delve just because they couldn't find that one secret door that revealed the rest of the dungeon. And finally, information can be safely made secret under two conditions. The first is that it's truly optional, and the second condition is if there are a variety of ways to learn the information." That summary to me, coupled with the dungeon checklist, having giving players reasons to interact and engage with the dungeon in different and diverse ways, those things coming together are really where I am. I got so much out of that. I've gotten so much mileage out of this, and it just it really expanded my understanding of what a dungeon needs. And so when I'm designing rooms now, to get to something that's more practical, I'm just leaving spaces, right? Like I will just leave a little space that says connects to blank in room blank. And because I know that it connects to something that I've placed in this room, or I rolled up on a random table in the Dolmenwood campaign book, or any of these other random table books that we all have so many of, right? I know it's going to connect to something, and I know it's not just set dressing. So I want to leave that open, and it's become a way for me to think about dungeons. And I have these bullet point lists of this is another thing for them to flee from. And then I think that's a lot of things to flee from, right? Or that's a lot of things to fight, and start kind of balancing the dungeon. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. And I don't know if it's going to end up with an interesting dungeon. But and one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode and kind of talk through mostly just stuff I've found useful is not because I want to tell everybody about this dungeon and how great it is, but because I have found that writing through the lens of this is going to be a module when I know full well it very likely isn't going to be, and internalizing some of the stuff that makes the best modules great and the bad modules not so great, that has really been I've done a lot of learning, and it's been fascinating to kind of focus in on dungeon design, which is obviously kind of a cornerstone of what Shadow Dark kind of expects that we're going to do. It is certainly not the only thing we do in Shadow Dark games, but exploring dungeons is a key element of this game we've all decided to play. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I want to give you just one example, Jody. I'm going to spoil a room. It's not, I don't think it's that big of a deal. There is a room. It's a turret. It's a part of a turret. I'm not going to read you the room description, but I'm going to read you the elements in the room. There's a trap door going down. It is locked, and it may or may not be trapped. That is landmark. The trap would be hidden. There are stairs up, landmark. Okay, stairs up to the next level. There are arrow slits. landmark. Hidden. If you stare into them, you can see into Phrygia, this fairy realm, from before the time that the Ring of Chell was created, frozen in time. That is hidden. There's a door to room blank.
Thank you.
It is locked. However, beyond it, you can, if you listen at the door, hidden information, you will hear the low growl of hounds beyond. There isn't, I just tell you, there isn't anything currently, and I could go obviously back and change this. I might change the whole thing, Jody, just so you don't get spoiled. This is a fairly innocuous room, though. But what I loved about this, designing this room, is that there were so many opportunities for me to be creative and to connect it with the world and to connect it. Like, nothing in this room is like mind-blowingly incredible, but it took what would be a banal room and made it into something where I was like, oh, I can add a couple of hidden elements here. I can make it somewhat interactive where if you stare through these arrow slits, you're going to get some information. That information may or may not be useful. It probably will be in some way. But now when I'm designing the remainder of the dungeon, I can come back to that and kind of grab onto it and say, like, oh, if the players look through this arrow slit, then maybe that information will be useful over here. Maybe if they look through a lot of arrow slits, that information, they can kind of piece some things together. If they don't look through these arrow slits, is it important? Probably not. But it certainly would help. And so I don't know. I've talked for a long time. We both kind of have a lot of thoughts about this, but I don't know. That's an example of a room. Again, it's nothing special. I don't claim to be a professional designer of dungeons, but it was something that I thought was like emblematic of the stuff we've been talking about.
Absolutely. I am reminded, if I may, of a room in the module Quest for the Silver Sword by William W. Connors, which is in the Dungeons and Dragons basic relaunch. In the 80s, there was a rebranding of basic D&D. It went okay, but it did produce some interesting modules and kind of an interesting little campaign setting of the Thunder Valley. I've run this module to hilarious woe of my players. It did not go well. Things really got away from them. And it was a shame because I actually think the dungeon in Quest for the Silver Sword is pretty neat. So in this notion of a professional, I guess, because it got published. So this landmark hidden secret, you walk into a library. On the north wall are bookcases. To the north and to the east and west are entrance and exit points of egress. You are coming in from the west, and to the south is another door. One corner of the room, there's a desk, there's a beautiful rug, there's some sitting chairs, and a suit of armor stands on display in one corner. Landmarks. Everything you need to know is in the room is there. It's a library, blah, 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 go. Once you begin poking around the room, the suit of armor animates. The desk has a key and a scroll in it, as well as I think there's a map. The bookcase itself is unremarkable other than it is wet and rotten, which kind of leads to some other things. And the carpet is in immaculate shape, the rug. So what's the secret in the room? Well, the suit of armor animates to protect a treasure that's hidden under the rug. There's a lot of ways to circumnavigate the suit of armor. It is bound to that room. You find out pretty quickly. So you can just leave. But if you want the goodies under the rug, you got to get past the suit of armor. There's the secret. Do you need what's in the secret chamber to finish the dungeon? No. Is it a magic item? Yes. So like it's, to me, that room, just as you were talking through these things, I was like, yep, check, 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 check. All of those elements are there, and ended up hilariously both being really fun to interact with and kind of derailing things as the players decided that like figuring out a way to bait this very dangerous suit of armor was a way to go.
One question I have is, would it be, and I don't know anything about this, but first of all, was it possible to know what the treasure was, like what was underneath the rug? Like, what is it possible in other parts of the dungeon to find out what that might be? No. First of all, and second of all, would it be better if it was?
No and no.
Okay.
Is my answer. And the would it be better if it was is subjective.
Sure.
it would only become like, no, it has to be if that item were essential. It's the key to get into the room where the silver sword that you're there to get is. Okay, well then, yeah, that needs to move up the hierarchy. And I think that's what I like about this notion of landmark, hidden secret is it's presenting a hierarchy of information, which is, the end of the day, hey, we're GMing. What do you got to do? Deliver information. So, but how do I do that is from our earliest days role-playing together was your $1 million question of like, so how do you deliver the information?
Yeah.
You need a framework. The other thing that strikes me about this whole discussion and concept that I've never really thought about, or certainly in a cursory view of reading modules or taking on the wisdom of the internet, is the notion that dungeon design, what we've been talking about, is very different than room design. There is undeniably a Venn diagram and an overlap, but those two things are different. But that's starting to kind of feel like a core takeaway. So maybe we ought to hear from a sponsor and come back.
Today's episode of Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Critical Coverage, the only insurance that is designed specifically for crawlers. Look, let's be honest. When torches are only an hour long, it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when. And for that matter, have you ever found yourself scrambling to stabilize your fighter after a surprise pit trap, or worse, realizing that you're in a life or death situation and you completely run out of luck? Well, that's where Critical Coverage comes in. They offer comprehensive plans that protect against all the classic dangers in Shadowdark: collapsing ceilings, poisonous bites, cursed treasure, and of course, good old-fashioned zombies. And here's the best part. Critical Coverage does not ask how you got into trouble in the first place. Jody, you have been using Critical Coverage for quite some time. It has saved your behind, your buttocks, supple as they are, from danger and certain death many times. Talk to me about it. What do you like about Critical Coverage?
Well, I have indeed. I am what you would call more of a henchman than a hero when I go adventuring. And, there's certain job liability therein. I am really good at holding a lantern and or torch. My business card says so. And it turns out that some adventurers will want me to expand the scope of our agreement. I would be lost without critical care coverage. Not literally lost. They ran away. Well, I mean, some of them turned to stone and the rest ran away, which was a shame because I was left holding the torch. And admittedly, I was running away too. But, I'm sure they were taken care of with critical care coverage in that moment. And I'm here to talk about it. So good job, everybody.
Great story, Jody. So don't wait until your next critical fail to think about coverage. Visit criticalcoverage.shadowdark.co.ca today to get a free quote. Your first month is free. Because in the Shadowdark, the light always goes out. But your coverage doesn't have to.
Alrighty then, let's bring the topic into the light and have a few core takeaways from this meandering exploratory delve into dungeon design.
Sure.
Matt?
Yeah, so my first one is start with a theme, a map, and a checklist. Give yourself a good starting point, nail down that theme, find yourself a map, draw one or don't, but also have a checklist close at hand.
I think that's great advice. And what I was struck by in reflection on our discussion here was the scope and breadth of materials that you have given everybody in the show notes here to consider for their own dungeon design. Man, inspiration takes many forms. You can go for a walk in the woods, or you can bury yourself in a pile of books and reading, or do the weird thing I do and collect old modules. However, caution, inspiration is great until it usurps action. Inspiration takes many forms. Be mindful of if you have taken in too many.
In that same vein, Jody, I would like to list a few resources. The Dread Thingonomicon, Tome of Adventure Design, Into the Assassin Citadel, Into the Weird and Wild, The Monster Overhaul, Knave 2, The Shadowdark Core. I could go on and on and on. There are so many books of random tables, and everyone has their favorite, And it turns out that at a certain point, it's overwhelming and not helpful. Limit your materials, specifically limit those roll tables to the ones that give you the most inspiration and the best bang for your buck.
And I'm going to kind of pick up where we left off our general discussion and also go back to Matt's top takeaway about the theme, a map, and a checklist. Man, don't lose your dungeon for its rooms. It's so easy to get bogged down in room design that you lose what Matt was talking about and taking us through today, which was dungeon design. Just keep that theme at the fore of your thoughts and your design principles, and you're going to end up just fine. All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into one of your future games. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, or just say hi, you can get at us at the dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out on YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, as always, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any of the many materials we referenced in this episode in the show notes. Until next time, may your taverns be light and your shadows be dark.
Oh, crap. I gotta read the... Dungeon Master... I was looking up a random table. Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It's produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Ooh, there's some graffiti on this dungeon wall. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production. Is not affiliated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shadow Arc RPG is an RPG copyright 2023. Got it. Done. Ooh. This hallway has an ooze in it.